Okay, hello, welcome everybody. Hello from New York City, and thank you very much for joining today's Cambridge University Press webinar. And the topic we're talking about today is publishing open access in Cambridge journals. My name's John Edwards. I'm part of the open research team here at the Press, and we will shortly be joined by a very exciting panel for today's discussion, who it will be a great pleasure for me to introduce. So slightly different to what's been advertised, we're actually not going to present any slides to you today. Instead, we're going to take really the discussion route for the webinar. So we're going to explore the perspective of each of our guests from their fields and from their positions within the scholarly communications ecosystem. And really our hope is that this webinar makes a contribution toward resolving one of the major challenges that we at Cambridge have identified, and that is a gap in awareness and understanding around the topic of publishing open access, particularly that is among those that may have most to gain from the transition to OA, that's the authors themselves. So before we get on with the introductions, we'll just go through a few short housekeeping notes. So if you could move on to the next slide. Thank you very much, Marta. The format of this Zoom call means that you have joined us in listen-only mode. So that doesn't mean that we don't want you to participate. We absolutely do, and we welcome your questions, thoughts, and your comments throughout the session. So please do submit these using the Q&A function within Zoom. We're going to leave plenty of time at the end of the session to come back to questions and answer them. We're recording today's session as well, and the recording will be circulated to everyone who registered in the days after the session has finished. So, without further delay, I think I'd really like to ask our panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their current exposure to open access. So in alphabetical order, joining us from Cambridge, Anne. Anne, welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, John. My name is Anne Avouris. I'm executive publisher and head of journals North America for Cambridge University Press based in New York. I have had significant experience with managing both hybrid journals, gold open access journals, and journals that have made the transition to one or the other in my 15 years working in academic publishing across both the humanities and social sciences and the STM communities. And I'm looking forward to participating today from the perspective of the publisher.
Thank you very much, Anne. And joining us from Virginia Commonwealth University, Professor Gonzalo Bearman.
Hello, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you today. I'm Gonzalo Bearman. I serve at Virginia Commonwealth University as the Chief of Infectious Diseases. I'm an epidemiologist, and I'm also now the Editor-in-Chief of Antimicrobial Stewardship and Healthcare Epidemiology, which is an official publication of the Society for Healthcare of America Epidemiology, or SHEA, by way of our publisher, Cambridge University Press. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you very much, Gonzalo. And finally, Professor William Vencill. William, welcome.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure. Thank you for the invitation to be on the panel this afternoon. I'm a professor of crop and soil sciences at the University of Georgia. Been at the University of Georgia since 1989. I've been editor of the journal Weed Science since 2010 and have been with Cambridge University Press since 2016. And again, thank you so much.
Great. So we'll move on to the panel discussion now. So William, if I can start with you, I think it would be really interesting just to get your perspective from within your discipline. So how many of your peers submit their work OA, and what would you say the general awareness is around publishing research in this way?
So thank you. I think a number of our peers are starting to become aware of OA. Probably starting in 2019, they started becoming aware of the benefits My journal's been publishing some open access journals articles for at least 10 or 15 years. The benefits for a very applied, so the journal Weed Science that I edit, I'm editor-in-chief of, publish a number of things that are relatively applied in the agricultural area. And so our benefits essentially are to those audiences that would not be society members. A number of regulatory people are very interested in our work, but normally don't belong to society and would not pay for the journal. We have a number of agricultural consultants who would be very interested in our work and normally would not be members or pay for the journal. The same goes for extension specialists, especially at the county level. Also a number of other people, even growers are very interested in some of the work published in the journal, and they would not be normal subscribers. So we have a number of audiences that we really pick up by going the OA route, and it lets us get our word out to the end users much more easily.
So it's very much around the reach and exposure of the work, which broadens it far beyond the traditional audiences. Yeah, that's great. And have you seen the uptake of OA change at all over the past few years? I'd be really interested to hear.
Yes. So for my journal, Weed Science, I ran some numbers to get ready for this panel today. And so in 2019, we had 6 open access articles during the year 2019. And in 2020, we had about 16, and we've had 20 so far this year. So we're definitely seeing a definite rise in OA articles. For one of my sister journals, Weed Technology, which is more applied than Weed Science, we've had about 22 to 26 articles a year since 2019. I really didn't run any numbers earlier than that. But yeah, so we've had a great interest. And the thing about Weed Technology, it is going to go full OA in 2023 because of a lot of the author interest in going the OA route. So they're the first of our society journals to go full OA. And probably Weed Science will be second in 24, 25. And I think you have some questions later on. I will discuss some of our hesitancy there to go be first. So,
sure, that's great, thank you. And I know that sort of exponential rise in open output is something that we're seeing at Cambridge across the breadth of our list as well, which is fantastic. Gonzalo, if I can turn to you and pose you the same question, how many of your peers are submitting their work open access, and what do they see as the benefits?
That's a great point. And I think what we're seeing in the field of infectious diseases and healthcare infection prevention is a growing interest in open access for the simple reason that most scientists, physicians, or bench scientists or natural sciences scientists want their material to be accessible, to be read, and to be easily downloadable. What SHEA has done is they've really seized on a moment to launch a new journal, which is ASHI, or Antimicrobial Stewardship, Healthcare Epi, which is 100% open access as a complementary journal to our other journal through Cambridge, which is Infection Control and Healthcare Epidemiology, which is not 100% open access. So we're really seizing on the moment in which there's a rapid evolution of knowledge in infectious diseases, infection prevention, COVID-19, looking for rapid dissemination and printing, wide access with, and I must add this as a point, one of our missions is to be really more targeted to low and middle income countries also, and the open access platform is perfect for that. Really excited about that.
And I imagine, given your field, the impact of the pandemic on the importance of immediate access to information has been significant and really quite profound. Has that accelerated the sort of the desire to publish open access?
Absolutely. I think that the need, or more immediate need, for rapid information and dissemination of rapid information rapidly is a big driver of the launch and success of ASHI, which has really only been around since the beginning of this year and has been very successful with numbers of submissions and publications thus far.
And that you touched on the very interesting question around equity in the broader scholarly communication system. And Anne, if I can bring you in here and ask you to maybe think about how we're trying to ensure equity across our publishing as we move to becoming a more open access publisher, and what are some of the challenges we're encountering there?
Sure. So lack of equity is a real issue in publishing. And as a press, we want to ensure that we don't replace barriers to access to research with barriers to publication of research. Right now, we have a number of avenues through which researchers can publish open access. So for both gold open access and hybrid journals, we have read and publish agreements that pay for the cost of publishing. So researchers don't have to have individual grant funding to pay APCs or article processing charges. And the rate at which this read and publish program has expanded has been really astronomical, as you know. Last year, we had 18 transformative agreements. Now we have over 100 agreements covering 1,000 institutions in 30 countries. That's representing nearly 50% of our research article authors. So for publication in gold open access journals by researchers in the Global South, we also waive 100% of APCs for corresponding authors coming from what are called Group A countries, as defined by Research for Life, which is an initiative from the World Health Organization. We also discount APCs by 50% for researchers from Group B countries. And just to give a little bit more background on that, Group A and Group B countries are themselves defined by GNI per capita, among other metrics, by Research for Life. And you can find a list of countries that fall into those two categories on the Research for Life homepage. For publication in gold open access journals by researchers anywhere, we also have a 100% waiver program, for which only a simple application is needed, which is essentially a letter from your department head or other similar figure confirming that there is no funding available for APC payment. And beyond that, we are continuing to work with other publishers to come up with a sustainable and equitable framework for supporting researchers globally for the long term. We do understand that read and publish agreements won't be possible for all institutions to negotiate, and that there is a sizable number of independent researchers, like some that William mentioned earlier, for which APC funding is not going to become available in the short term. So there are numerous ways that we are working to address this. But the ultimate goal is that no one will be prevented from publishing open access in our journals going forward.
That's great. Thank you very much, Anne. And if I can come back to you, William, and think about that issue of equity, is that something that as somebody involved in a journal, you're thinking about and you're concerned by as we shift towards a more open structure to publishing?
Yeah. I have worried about the equity. Over half of the submissions to my journal are out of the US, and about 40% are from China. So I've been concerned about what open access only would do to my submissions from China. I know there are no read and publish agreements with China, and they probably wouldn't fit in some of the lower income country categories. So that's a concern there. But from other countries, that would be great, because I know it's been a limitation under our old system for people from the Global South to submit to the journal because of page charges.
Definitely, yeah. And of course, Gonzalo, with ASH being an entirely gold journal, is that something you're thinking about as well, and how to ensure equity across the sort of landscape there?
Where we're not just thinking about it, we're really trying to be as active as possible. So it is true that we launched this year, and it's true that the majority of the content is still North American. However, we have been very aggressive in recruiting content from Europe, from Africa, and now focusing on South America, Central America, of course, parts of Asia. So we're trying to be as deliberate in our approach with a lot of the invited material, giving thought not only into the content or the topic that may be of interest, but potential authors or collaboration of authors, such that we have a representative sample of really the community of infection prevention, infectious diseases, and antimicrobial stewards out there.
And I think us as a press, we have a role to play in this as well. And we're trying very hard, as Anne says, to place those sort of building blocks in place to ensure that there is a path for people to publish in our journals, irrespective of where they find themselves and which institution they're affiliating to, and that's really, really important that we don't lose sight of that. So we're very well represented on the sort of sciences end of things on the panel today, but and I want to ask about the humanities as well, because we obviously have a very diverse portfolio here at Cambridge. And how are we intending to support the humanities as we transition to OA, and what are we thinking about in that area?
Yeah, so as you said, we do have a very strong portfolio in the humanities and social sciences. In particular, we have strengths in history, in political science. I personally manage a number of journals in area studies, and we've really seen terrific engagement from journals in these areas as well in terms of embracing open access. The answer, again, I think is going to come down to a mix of read and publish agreements and waivers, but primarily the former. Within the press, we're actually seeing this year a greater take-up of open access via R&D in some humanities subject areas than we are in STEM subject areas, which has been really surprising. I think there's a real appetite for open access publishing in the humanities in particular that often goes unacknowledged. Researchers are seeing the benefits of open access on improving the accessibility of their work, including to the interested lay public who will not have access to academic subscriptions to libraries. They're also seeing greater usage of their work, potentially citations to their work, and greater freedom in reuse, which is another key aspect of open access publishing, which often goes unacknowledged in sessions. So in the US, we have well over 100 agreements with open source institutions, of course. And many of those institutions are significant contributors to our publications output in the humanities. There's a lot of support already, I think, for the humanities to transition to OA, and we're very happy to answer additional questions.
But yeah, we're extremely actively involved and engaged in transitioning and supporting the humanities as we move toward a more open future. There's absolutely no reason why the humanities can't benefit in exactly the same way as the sciences can from instant and immediate access to research. So we're very conscious of the positive impact that publishing open can have, and the impact in terms of citations, the impact in terms of downloads. And I wondered if there was any particular insight that we can give from either journal. I think, William, you might have some information to share with us on that from your own title.
So yeah, for our journals, I mean, one of the concerns we have, we're a society journal, and historically we have 3 journals in the Wheat Science Society of America, and they provided most of the revenue for the society. So our concern going forward into an OA world would be any change in the revenue from the journals to the society. That would be a concern that we would have, and we still need to work that out. And we're in constant communication with our board of directors on any changes in revenue. So that's one that's sort of still fuzzy in my mind, at least.
And guaranteeing the sustainability of the journal is obviously paramount. Yeah, we don't want to make any changes at the expense of anything. It's finding a way to sort of continue that, isn't there?
Correct.
And Gonzalo, if I can come to you and ask you about keeping track of policies, because this is it's a rapidly changing area, isn't it? And for an individual researcher, complying with perhaps mandates they've got from funders or institutional policies that they're needing to align with, how is one best placed to sort of keep on top of all of those different things?
Well, it's not an easy a task, and I think if it's just up to one individual, and things will certainly probably slip through the cracks or through the holes. So to stay on top of the policies, that's where you really need a collaboration, not only with the editor-in-chief and the editorial team, but also the publisher to help you help us with standardized processes. And I think one thing that's helpful for us at the Society for Healthcare Epidemiology of America is, as we have now 2 journals, that we want to make sure that the policies and the way that we review the processes are essentially identical for both, so that within the two camps or families within SHE and the publishing arms, that we're at least staying on top of those particular potential concerns. And last but not least, there is a publishing committee or a SHE Pubs committee within the society that helps us with priorities and things related to the publication mission of the society. So there are multiple, let's say, safeguards or areas in which we can overlap to try to assist us with that.
And as an author at an institution, for example, do you think the institution might have a role to play in assisting authors in that sense, in terms of helping them navigate this very complex system that's evolving around them?
Yeah, so the institutions are certainly going to set the standards for the ethical standards for research. You know, the IRBs and institutions generally don't go beyond that when it comes to preparing manuscripts and submitting, but there are ethical standards and research standards that one must do as part of your institutional training that certainly touches on those. Sadly, there's no uniformity on those training courses across the various or the hundreds of US or North American colleges or institutes, but I think there's enough commonality there that it does set a certain ethical standard of data collection, data gathering, data presentation, anti-copyright, anti-plagiarism kind of things, such that it's all out there in really in the mindset of the authors and of the scientists.
Yeah, I think I have a little bit I could add to that. I know I've discussed read and publish agreements with our librarian here at the University of Georgia for the last few months, and I was glad to hear as we started the webinar that the University of Georgia now has a read and publish agreement. I think the best thing for any individual researcher at a university, I can't speak for institutes and the private sector, but in the university world here in North America would be for that communication from the librarian. They can really tell you, they can communicate to faculty in a number of disciplines what the read and publish agreement is for their various universities. And that is a really good way. And as Gonzalo said, with the Weed Science and the Weed Technology Journal, we have a good editorial team that can communicate to any author inquiries, particularly outside of the US, on what the read and publish agreements are and what the best way for anybody to get published who wants to be published is. We're still filling our way through this. We're on the path, but we're nowhere near the end of the path. So I have to say we do not have all of the questions answered on some of this. This is pretty new for us.
So one thing I would add, John, is that we also want to be, or at least be perceived, very least be perceived as being very author friendly with our new journal, so that we are seen as being very responsive to the questions posed to us by authors, technical or otherwise, about publications. And if we don't immediately know the answer, then of course we collaborate closely with our liaisons in Cambridge University Press. And I think that's really important because it gives I don't want to say customer, but it is kind of a customer satisfaction question or issue. And we want to be perceived as very customer responsive. And I think that's critically important because authors want to be perceived as important. They want to be published. They want it open to all to read, to share their information.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks both for your insight there. Gonzalo, you mentioned getting sort of questions from authors. Are you able to give us an insight into the types of questions that you're getting, if that's not too much to ask?
Yeah, of course. Some of the more simple questions is like, I've got a paper I'd like to submit. How do I submit it? I mean, that's a pretty straight up question. That's easy to answer. But I think the most common one is going to be the question of the article processing charge. And it's particularly coming from low and middle income countries and the process that we use to either waive or discount that. We also get questions from SHE members as to what sort of impact their membership will have on the APCs, if any at all. We've received some questions about read and publish agreements. So we have a list of read and publish agreements across North America that's helpful for us. And every now and then we do get questions about the content, about what we're looking to publish, which includes things like concise reports or concise scientific reports, reviews, commentaries, or full scientific articles. So we get all those kinds of questions. It's good that we're getting the questions. That means there's some interest. I'll leave it at that.
Absolutely.
Welcome the questions. Keep them coming.
Nothing worse than silence. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. very interesting. And I think from the Cambridge side, what we're seeing is authors really navigate this system best when they know prior to submission that they are able to publish open access without needing to pay the APC. So we're working really, really hard to kind of work our way earlier in the process and establish that understanding as soon as we possibly can, because I think sometimes once authors have submitted, they're starting to think about something else. They're interested in just having the paper published rather than publishing it open access or not. So we're really keen to get that information out as soon as possible. And as you said, William, I think everybody is still feeling their way through this, and we haven't quite worked out the best way to communicate with that. What's the best channel to get that information to authors? And one thing we're starting to think more and more about is how subject liaison librarians within institutions can be a really helpful conduit for that message, but there are also lots of other ways as well. So yeah, we're continuing to think very hard about how we engage on that front.
John, if I may, one other FAQ, which we try to preempt, is the issue of PubMed indexing. If you're a new journal, such as we are, you're not immediately PubMed indexed, as you know, or DOAJ indexed. So we want to be straightforward with people and say we're not currently or presently PubMed indexed. We've already received enough content to begin the application process, something that we're very proud of already in the first 9 months of this publication, but being clear to the authors and those who are submitting invited papers that the indexing will be retroactive. So whatever's submitted and published now will eventually be indexed. And that's important for people because, they want to be discoverable. Their work needs to be discoverable.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely. Anne, do you want to come in with if you've got any examples of sort of common questions that we get from authors in the run-up to publication?
Just first, I completely agree with you, John, that the earlier that authors understand the mechanisms of open access publication, the better. And this is a really transitional moment, and the opportunities for publication, open access do differ from publisher to publisher. It's, transformative agreements, read and publish agreements, these are not universal. These are things that we in the industry might be very familiar with, but researchers can't really be expected at this point to understand all the nuances between green open access, gold open access, APCs versus RNP, which is why we're having these webinars. So most of the questions that I get about APCs, about publishing open access, are about APCs, what the cost is if they're in an institution with an agreement with us. Sometimes there's a discount rather than a full waiver, what they need to provide in order to move forward, what kind of license to sign, what the differences are between the different Creative Commons licenses that can be chosen upon publication, and also how to apply for a discretionary waiver, how they go about publishing in a gold open access journal, even if they don't have funding, or can they even do that is a question that comes up. So the earlier that we can signpost these things, the better. Obviously for new journals starting out, there's a lot of work that editors can do when commissioning to try to signpost this to the authors that they're recruiting. But it is going to take some time until people are familiar with the terminology and can navigate this more easily.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Anne. And Bill, did you want to come in with anything on that question?
No.
Okay, sure.
Good. I just thought I heard my name. That's still.
No problem. And I think something we've mentioned in passing maybe a few times is the issue around retention of copyright for authors. And that's something we've concentrated very closely on at Cambridge. And I don't know, Anne, if you want to say anything about the changes we've made and why we've made those changes over the past sort of year or so.
Sure. I think it's actually a couple of years now that we have moved for all of our own journals from a copyright transfer to a license to publish agreement. So we no longer require that authors transfer their copyright to Cambridge in order to publish. And that's true not only of our open access journals, but also of our hybrid journals. And I alluded earlier as well to the reuse possibilities with open access. So there are a number of different Creative Commons licenses that authors can choose to publish under when they're publishing gold open access in our journals. And authors have freedom and flexibility from us in terms of the choice of those licenses and how they want to see their material reused. They vary from more restrictive, which means that you can't that people cannot create derivatives or commercially profit off of your article, to a very, very open CC BY license. So even the mechanism of publishing, of copyright ownership, of reuse has changed in this transition to open access, and it has impacts beyond just open access publications, but also hybrid publication as well in terms of author freedom and copyright retention. So I would encourage everybody to look into what the publisher is providing to them when it comes time to sign a license agreement for your publication, and ask questions and see if there are additional opportunities for you to retain copyright or to choose a different license.
That's great. I think there's far greater awareness around that detail now than there ever was before. And I think whilst that's not explicitly linked to the open access movement, it feels very kind of parallel to it, really, which is great that we're making changes and that authors are far more aware of the options they've got in that space. Yeah. And I think for any authors on the call, researchers on the call who are thinking, I'd really like to sort of spread the word about the positive opportunities afforded to me and my peers by open access. Gonzalo, what would you say is the best way for an author to further this cause that we're all so closely engaged in? What can be done? Who can they speak to? What should they say?
Okay, I think as we're learning, there's communication in this day and age is best when it's done multimodal. So by attending seminars like this, bringing it back to your home institution, sharing it by way of Twitter, sharing it by way of blogs, sharing it by way of even perspectives, written perspectives in journals might be a way to do that also. The bottom line is that open access, particularly gold open access, allows an author, an investigator to publish, to be discoverable, to share it, and to be cited. And it can really, as the name suggests, it is open access, and it's as equitable a way to really spread the word.
And Bill, what would you say to anyone on the call thinking about that question?
I would suggest, communication with the librarian. I know I went to a publishing summit with you all in Cambridge in 2018, and that's where I first learned about Read and Publish and the exciting opportunities that provides. And I've talked to our librarian for a couple of years. And for a land-grant university, such as I'm at the University of Georgia, the ability for all of everybody in the state or in the country to access our research and our land-grant mission is really important. And a number of faculty here would feel that way. And so just communicate. The librarian is always seeking, what journals should I renew? What should I do differently? And if you communicate to the librarian, you can really, I think, direct some of these discussions. They will respond. In fact, when I first talked to the librarian, he says, I haven't had any faculty ask me about it. So is it really that important? Because I was telling them the advantages and everything. And, I talked to some of my colleagues in the department, and, so you call the librarian, this is a really good thing for us. And I think he's heard more and more of that. And we finally have gotten some movement in that regard. It's a conversation. That's the best point of communication. And with all of the electronic things we have, personal communication always works best when you can.
I would definitely, if I may add, I would definitely agree.
Sure.
And I forgot to mention our librarians. I don't want to say they're a dying breed, but they certainly don't get the visits that they used to. People don't seem to go to libraries anymore, at least not in my institution. Everything's downloadable. And I even asked the medical students if they know where the medical library is. And they say, yeah, but I've never been there. which I think is amazing. So you can leverage the librarians, particularly if the librarians are very active on social media, which some librarians are. I think that's a very powerful tool.
Absolutely, I think that's a really important point. And I think one of the things we're starting to think about is authors who have gone through the process of publishing their work, open access, talking about the experience and sharing the impact of it. Because I think sometimes it's, you know, we have discussions like this, and publishing work, open access, feels like it might be a sort of a slightly abstract concept. So making it real by having somebody talk about their experience and showing what it's done to their particular paper, or giving a real life sort of insight to it, I think can also be a very powerful way to do it. So spread the word and talk about the positive.
I think, John, also as editors-in-chief of open access journals, we should have platforms or strategies within our journals to really promote the content on social media. We're doing that and actually formalizing it even more and more within our society for both our journals, to have a dedicated kind of social media editor, member of the editorial team, because we've noted if you publish something and then immediately tweet it and send it out across the society, the downloads just go up immensely. So those are opportunities to really spread the word. And I realize it's not a person-to-person discussion. It doesn't have that personal level, but it does have the reach, and that's critically important.
Absolutely, yeah. And go ahead, Bill.
I mean, I would totally agree with that. We promote, from each issue of our journal, we promote an article. So we send out a social media link. We send out a news release to any media in the agricultural sector that would like to pick it up. And when they pick it up, the altometric score goes through the roof. And if that article happens to be open access, it's just like turbocharging it. You can double that altometric score if we do a press release and a featured article and it also happens to be open access. And we're doing our best to communicate that to our society membership.
And I think the more mature this method of publishing becomes, I think the more data everyone is going to have around action and activity like that, because I think demonstrating that impact in a very material way. And I know we're starting to see some really interesting statistics around some of the publishing that we've got. And Gonzalo, I don't know if I think you had some statistics that you were keen to share, or if not, I can share them too, because they're from the sort of Cambridge portfolio. But
yeah, so we're obviously very new, so we don't have many statistics. We don't have tremendous statistics on what we published so far, but in general, the gold open access publications are receiving significant more downloads than there are non-open access equivalents. The number of citations is at least 30 to 50% more compared to non-open access equivalents. So there's clearly a niche, or a role, I should say, for open access. Altmetrics, downloads, citations, it's just much more democratic in access. And again, people want to share their work. I can't think, in my experience from my career, I've never met a scientist, an epidemiologist, infectious disease specialist who's publishing that doesn't want their work to be read or to be picked up or to be understood or feel they made some sort of impact. So it's a powerful tool.
Yeah, it might also be a good here to talk briefly about the difference between gold open access and free access, because there is a real difference between the two. Gold open access publications carry with them all the benefits of having a Creative Commons license and the reuse benefits. There is no subscription attached to that content. But there are some fundamental similarities between that material and material that might be published under a subscription and then made freely available. And one of them is obviously the lack of a paywall and everyone being able to read the content. And Cambridge has been very supportive of researchers being able to share their content, and has implemented a couple of different ways that can be done safely and effectively and sustainably. One of which is called Core Share. So we allow anyone who has access to a Cambridge article to share that article on through a read-only share button, and it creates a link, and that link can be posted absolutely anywhere, given to anyone, used on social media. And just going back to what Gonzalo and Bill were saying earlier about the impact of social media, I have seen tremendous usage of core share links on the journals that I publish that have social media coordinators, which again has led to an increase in altmetrics for those articles as well, and for those journals overall. So just the basic fact of having material accessible, not behind a paywall, is really crucial to getting that additional usage, those additional eyeballs, that material being shared. And thankfully, we have a mechanism for doing this even on non-Gold OA content, but obviously the Gold OA content is the material that's really benefiting the most.
Absolutely. And I think one of the other interesting things we're seeing at Cambridge is, just to sort of balance things between HSS and STM, is that the benefits we're talking about here are true across both of those discipline types. And that's really important for us to not lose sight of. Sometimes it feels as though the benefits, the impact boost is something exclusive potentially just to the sciences. And that's just not true at all. And we've now got comprehensive data to show that there is a lasting and really measurable benefit to HSS research as well as STM. And in fact, the benefit is exponential. So the longer the article is out there, the greater the difference in citations and downloads becomes between that subscription article and the article that's published open. And that's particularly relevant, that lasting impact for HSS research, because of course the kind of tail of usage is that little bit longer as well. And we're coming up to the last sort of 15 minutes or so. So just want to remind everybody to place any questions or thoughts they've got into the Q&A. We'll be very happy to come to them. But I think I'd like to sort of pose this question to each of us in turn. And we're all striving to achieve greater access to knowledge and greater openness. If there was one thing you could change to help all this move along, what would it be? And I apologize that that's a slightly difficult question to answer, but I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts on it. So Bill, do you want to start?
Sure. If I was king for a day, I mean, the thing that would be easier if the entire publishing industry had one way of doing this, and that would make it so easy for authors to know what to expect and what they would need to do to publish open access. It would really, really help things. I know that's almost impossible, but in this area, that would be my wish for the day.
We certainly hear that, and we're definitely conscious of that for sure. And I think there will be more homogenization, I think, as things move forward. We're at this nascent stage where there are so many different ways of doing things, and that is complex for people to navigate. I completely hear you, yes, but we're certainly thinking about it. But great point. Gonzalo, what would you change?
So what I would say, if there's anything that we can do to clearly and broadly communicate that the article processing charge should not be the major barrier or deterrent to submitting to an open access journal. I think that's hugely important. I think for many people, there's a sticker price shock, and they don't realize that there are options, there are waivers, there are reductions, et cetera, et cetera. I think it was said in this discussion, we certainly don't want that charge to be the limiting factor for quality research to be published.
Yeah, absolutely. The APC is, we're trying to move away from it, I think, as a publisher, as a sort of sole determinant of supporting open access publishing. So that's something really important to us as well. Anne, what would you change?
I think I'd actually change the pace of transition, because I think that the most painful part is the time it takes. for publishers to make the shift, for institutions to think about how to convert their spending, for authors to learn a myriad new options and opportunities at different publishers. It is very confusing. I think if we knew that we could wrap it all neatly up in 3 to 4 years, that would be a huge relief. And we would be starting fresh in a few years with an even playing field and everybody following the same policies and protocols.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. I think that's the perspective that we have here in the US, because we're not covered. There is no federal mandate, for example, for open access here. So that driver, that push for change doesn't necessarily exist in the same way that it does under countries that are signatories of Plan S, for example. And I think that's something I would probably like to see change. I think we're particularly in the US, it feels like an extra sort of bit of emphasis and an extra bit of momentum, which can be generated by something like a mandate, I think could be a very helpful accelerant to change. There's always, complexities associated with things like that, and not everybody agrees with every part of the mandate, but I think it's very difficult to argue with the impact that Plan S has had on the rate of change. And I think it's really interesting to think about what that could look like in the States as well.
Yeah, absolutely. As long as it's a funded mandate.
That is important, yes.
I still actually remember back in 2007 when the NIH started requiring deposit of manuscripts to PubMed Central, and how painful that rollout was, and sitting in my office getting calls from researchers asking me to explain it to them. This was relatively early in my publishing career. We're now experiencing that on a global scale. So we have the equivalent of, a global population of researchers calling and emailing us, trying to figure out how to satisfy the mandates from their various funders and governments. And yeah, everybody's on a different time scale. Everyone has a different level of funding. Everyone is speaking from a different position. It is really, really tricky to align all of the policies and requirements, and we can't underestimate that.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm not sure we've got any questions in the chat. Gonzalo or Bill, do you have any questions that we haven't covered yet that you'd like to sort of pose, or any other points you'd like to raise?
I'll defer to Bill first.
I don't have any. Go ahead, Gonzalo.
No, I think that it's not a question, it's just a point, and it's really a feedback on the high quality service we received, at least ASHI has received from Cambridge University Press. And I think it's really important to have that level of support for all technical matters and otherwise, particularly when one is launching a new journal. It's been hugely important. And the issue of APCs obviously is going to continue to come up as we become more successful. So it's good to have the backup and the technical support and really get the responses that we need in a prompt fashion.
I would totally agree with that. Having been with the journal, I mean, this journal I work with is going into its 70th year, so we've been around a while. We could not do what we've done with OA with some previous publishers we've worked with. Cambridge has been really, really great to work with in this process.
That's fantastic to hear. Thank you both for saying that.
It seems like there's a philosophical alignment, John, if I may, that we want to publish things and make it as democratic as possible, and the publisher seems to be aligned with us, and that's nothing but a good thing, I would say.
Well, I think that comes from the type of organization we are as well, given that we're part of Cambridge University, we see ourselves as very much part of the academic life cycle as well. So we're aligning with the mission that we've got as an organization, which is really important. So yeah, it's great to hear that that's matching so well with you too. As we sort of wrap up, I think it's maybe good to address perhaps some of the sort of mistruths that there are about publishing OA out there, just so we sort of cover them off. And one of the questions we sometimes get is around plagiarism and whether that is more likely in an open access journal. And I don't know if Anne, from the editorial perspective, you'd like to just address that one for everyone.
Sure. I was actually thinking about the issue of predatory journals, which does also often come up during these conversations. There is still quite a bit of resistance to OA as a publishing model because people think that it is predatory. And I think it's important that we emphasize that an open access publishing model in itself is not inherently predatory. What has happened is that people have taken advantage of the model to set up predatory publishers and predatory journals that prey on authors to solicit contributions at cost, and sometimes they are at quite low cost, but these journals don't perform peer review checks, they don't perform any of the traditional work that a reputable publisher does. And there are many resources out there that you can use if you have concerns about a journal, like Think, Check, Submit. That will guide you through a review process for assessing a journal's appropriateness and whether or not it may be suspect. And I think the plagiarism conversation comes into that as well, because of these concerns about overall quality of an open access journal, or the idea that it might not be reputable. There shouldn't be any additional concerns about plagiarism within an open access journal. We have some incredibly top tier open access journals on our list, both new launches, journals that have converted from previously being a subscription model, journals that are in the top 10 in terms of impact factor in their subject categories. These are reputable journals. It is simply the publishing model that is different.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Anne. All right. Well, I think we're coming to the close. And I think what we will encourage everybody to do is to absolutely speak to their library about their options that they might have to publish open access under any agreements that your institution might have, be those with Cambridge or other publishers as well, because there are many out there. It's really important to take advantage of them if they exist. And also watch out for communication from us in the next few days with a link to a recording of the session and indeed a survey for how you found the webinar in terms of usefulness. So please do take a moment to respond to that if you can. And otherwise, all I'd like to say is thank you very, very much to our panel for joining us. It's fantastic to have had you. Fantastic to have had your insight as well. So thank you, Gonzalo. Thank you, Bill. And thank you very much, Anne.
Thank you, John.
All right. Yeah, thank you very much, everybody. Stay safe, and we will see you soon.